Good morning, everybody. Let me add my welcome to Roy's and Avi's and Dean Ainsley. On behalf of Sanjeev and I, representing Mirage, thank you all for coming. It's great to see you all here. Let me start with perfect. While we load up, a couple of quick things. One, our school, to Dean Ainsley's point, our tagline now is developing leaders for a digitally driven world. And the best news in that, I think, is Sanjeev and I didn't have much to do with proposing it. So it actually sort of acknowledges the recognition that the rest of the faculty have as a way of both recognizing the importance of what we do, but also sort of how it's transforming business as a whole, which we've known, but it's nice when it comes from, so it's in fact, a professor of strategy and I are co-chairing the curriculum piece of that, and it's a much broader effort than that. And prior to that, we actually have started 2 years ago, maybe actually probably more like a year ago, a certificate in digital transformation. And as you've seen, Sanjeev has pioneered the MS in Business Analytics program, which just got approved. And I think we already have 40 plus students enrolled in less than a month of sort of going public, which really speaks to the demand for that. I also want to acknowledge Roy really quickly because Avi, Sanjeev, and I think we certainly worked hard, but Roy outworked us all by at least a factor of 2, and I'm being polite so I can keep some credit for myself. Actually, I'm not being polite, I'm being rude. Roy outworked us all by a substantial margin. The reason you see a digital tsunami is that's my trademark these days. Every presentation I give has that. But as the field has evolved, and I think Avi raised some really good questions, but all of us think about these a lot, which is what should our core course be? And our group, Ting Ting is here, Mingdi will be here shortly. We're working really hard on trying to figure out what we should be doing in the core. And I'll say we've been meeting almost weekly talking VCs in the back, on sort of what this should be. And sort of to be candid about this, I mean, this has been a long time since we've done things like this because I think we're all sort of struggling with Avi's questions, which is what should this course be? So we are actually calling this course Competing in the Digital Age. And so the delineation between, here's our challenge, as the school embraces digital transformation, my words, a lot of our stuff is being pushed into other areas too, because we've been sort of straddling a whole bunch of areas. And as they take on more sort of what is our role, and so we figured out that our title should be Competing in the Digital Age. And so let's I'm going to start with sort of what we think the course should be about. And this is based on a group discussion, but I have to say up front that this is my interpretation of our group discussion. I didn't have time to run these slides by too many people. But I think fundamentally what we're trying to do is help. And again, let's put ourselves in the shoes of MBA students and ask people who've got 5 and 6 years worth of work experience, what should we be training them for? And I think the number one thing we drive them for, we played with the name digital innovation too, and we ultimately chose not to do it, but really preparing people to lead digital innovation initiatives in companies all the way up to the top, which is sort of the big digital transformation. I think our core competence really is understanding digital drivers of change. I've been spending a lot of time with my strategy colleagues because we're co-leading this initiative, and they're taking on much more of the strategy role that sometimes I think some of us did in our core classes. But what is interesting is sort of, and I don't want to slam anybody, but the more you get into it with them, you realize that there is a piece of this domain that we understand better than anybody else, which has to do with what we're calling digital drivers of change. And so if you start talking about things like blockchain, which will be here sooner or later, nobody else in the business school is talking about this. So I think those are the kinds of, which is sort of the piece about emerging disruptive technologies. I learned this from Haim, Sanjeev learned this from Haim. We've always got to hold on to technology, which is of course growing in scope, as being our differentiator within sort of a business school. In this school, we're all sort of applied economists in the IS group, so we're going to sort of use the economics sort of lens to think about digital products and platforms. And we're learning also that strategy frameworks, the way many of us grew up with Porter and things, like when you talk about industry analysis, just don't work because the notion of I like to ask my students, like, what industry is Amazon in? And these are very hard questions to answer. So I think, not that the strategy frameworks are wrong, but the world has changed in substantive ways. And we need to think about, I always watch Michael Porter sort of adjustments to his 5 forces framework where people challenge him on complementaries as well. They enter it through this, and they actually don't. So the framework certainly has its uses, but I think it's important to adapt them. And then really sort of our goal is having them understand how you can compete differently. And then I think one piece that we have always emphasized is you need to live it. You need sort of the medium is the message. So we do need to give them some exposure to new tools, technologies, and whether it's things like Slack, which are fairly basic, that we were talking about last night over dinner, or sort of some of the more sophisticated business analytics tools, or whatever sort of strikes our fancy. So that's sort of our philosophy. Oh, the last thing I should say, and I chose those words purposefully, ideas to action, is one of the things we're learning is employability matters to these students. Obviously, that's not the part we're learning. We've always known that. But I think experiential learning is really critical, because I've been doing this for 32 years. And the thing you learn is we as PhDs sort of understand sort of concepts really well, but when it comes to putting into action, and you see, I'm sure all of you have seen this in your class projects, where they really need help learning how to apply the concepts we teach them. Oftentimes students revert back to common sense rather than try use some of the tools and techniques we tend to teach them. So I think giving them a sense of sort of how to apply what we teach them is critical. So that's sort of our roadmap. That's you can decide how many modules you want to call it, but it's what's driving change, how do you innovate using digital, what are the new business models that it enables. Now the 4th bullet is sort of my thing that I emphasize a lot, which is I think all companies are software companies, so that's Vijay's little twist on it. I think other people have different ways of approaching that. I think we will all agree that then you drill down from there to, well, what's really different? Clearly, big data is a big piece of and analytics is a big piece of the software story. But then all products are becoming digital. Products are becoming platforms. And then ultimately, what the heck do you need to build in your companies to actually pull all of this off? So I thought hard about, like, well, how do I present this material to all of you? And I don't want to make this into a lecture about theory, because all of you know the theory as well as I do. So what I thought I would do is walk you through some stories and how we sort of walk through, how we plan to walk through the curriculum. So the first thing is, the first class is really shock and awe, which is really look at and what always strikes me is so interesting, because I think we are so immersed in this. The rest of the world isn't as immersed as we are. There's a whole bunch of consultants and gurus trying to sell books. But for the most part, you take an average full-time MBA student or even an executive MBA student, they just don't live in the world they live in. So it's important to get them to reflect on these things. And I picked GE probably because I've been around a long time, but GE's management school was fantastic. And Jack Welch used to fire, if you were not number 1 or 2, you shut down the division. It was a breeding ground for managers all over the world. And what he's now saying is that's not good enough anymore. You just can't be excellent. Management, what you really have to be is sort of an analytics-driven software company, and they call themselves the world's premier digital industrial company, and they're actually saying they want to be digital industrial. And so Bill Rue, who is the CEO of GE Digital, is actually going to talk here to launch our new focus for us in the fall. But this sort of, that chart on the top, which is, the machines are software defined. They've got a big analytics platform. They're building digital twins, which are basically simulators for all the machines that they put out. And then they've got a suite of apps, which is sort of the complementary story. This, in a nutshell, is our course, frankly. And then we drill down into each of these things. But to get them excited, because it's very hard to talk about technologies in a way that they find interesting, I used this example in a different class this year, and it worked phenomenally well. So I don't know how many of you have heard of this company called Peloton. You ride this bike. But it's, you can ride a bike at home, or you can go to the studio and ride a bike. And it gives you, so it's a live class at home. You can do it on demand, or you can do it in real time. But it's got gamification. And I simply said, this is an amazing company. Its market cap, its private equity market cap is really high. And I asked them just to tell me what technologies it takes to do this. And immediately, you obviously come up with sensors, cloud, analytics, all of the things that video conferencing, connectivity, it's all in there. There's a story that they love, but this is also a crazy workout culture. And people immediately begin to see, and I said, think about this. This is a company that is making phenomenal amounts of money. It's $35 a month. Their cancellation rate of subscriptions is 0.5%. But it allows you to tell the story in a compelling way of how you can put together new business models using all of these things that we talk about. So these are the catalysts that I have been focusing on recently, but I'll let you, I don't need to explain any of these to you. So it's a way of backing into technology rather than opening with technology by relating it to an example that they find passionate. Then we switch into business models. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but here's you got all these automakers that have been selling cars for years. Predictions are they won't be selling as many cars. So this is Daimler's Car2Go, which is renting cars by actually the minute. You've got Cadillac, which has a subscription model. This is $1,500 a month, everything included, insurance, registration, and you can change your car 18 times a year. And it's concierge service. So again, you have to, and the last one is Hyundai's, Ioniq Hyundai is headquartered here, so we often use the Hyundai guys to come talk to our classes. And this is funny because this is interesting because this is a self-driving car. It's all electric, so and then you can get into a discussion of core capabilities. And I walk them through a whole discussion on, okay, you're an automaker. Who's going to win? Is it going to be the automakers that actually develop cars who can sort of license software, and GM bought cruise automation, or is it actually sort of the software companies like Google, which actually don't have a production car yet, or even Tesla? And my view of the world is it's a lot harder to make a few million cars at scale than it is to license software. And so my bet is actually on the car companies, but we'll see if I'm right. But regardless, it forces them to think a lot. And then from there you say, well, what allows these companies to differentiate themselves? It's sort of the know-how piece of it. But where it comes back to technology is if you don't codify know-how into software, you can't really scale innovation. So that's sort of, I'm just walking you through the logic of our course. And then there's lots of examples out here that I'm not putting up here, but things like Delta Airlines, which actually brought their IP for their reservation systems back. You're from Atlanta, you should know this story. Back in-house so that they can innovate faster. And there's lots of examples of companies. So for years we've been outsourcing, and now we're bringing a lot. So it speaks to sort of the rise of software as a differentiating asset. And then I give them an example which is very local, which they love about sort of Disney, because the theme parks were having a lot of trouble with overcrowding, and the customer experience was declining rapidly. And you can't really rearrange a park to improve sort of traffic flows and drive more people through a park. So they overlaid a whole software layer called MyMagic Plus, and I won't go into that allows them to drive 5,000 people more through the park. They stand for less time in lines, which means they have more time to spend money eating and shopping. So they're making more money, they're happier, and they didn't touch the park. All they did was sort of put a software layer on it. So this allows me to tell the story of how sort of the value of technology is really, and this is the Paul Romer view of the world, rearranging assets to deliver higher value. So this is sort of the underpinning of growth theory. And one of the challenges we have in this class, I think, is trying to figure out how much you want to go into concepts like sort of endogenous growth versus not. But so I do it in a little bit of a hand-waving kind of way. Then where you get to is sort of digital economics are fundamentally different from physical world economics. So now you have increasing returns, you have high fixed cost, low marginal cost, a network affects all the things we talk about routinely. And now I'm going to defer to my friend Mike Smith here because he knows, I actually used the opening part of your book every class on thank you. With Netflix, because Netflix started off as a long tail company, but increasingly they're finding out that big content still matters. So I tell the story about Netflix and how they sourced House of Cards when every other network turned it down. So this leads you into the whole analytics piece. Well, if you have the data and you understand what customers want, you actually will buy 2 seasons of Netflix, and every network said no to even 1 pilot episode. But then I get into sort of the interesting conversation about Spotify. So you can see I'm moving into platforms, digital content. And then I say, well, you remember all the papers that we wrote in the 90s about long tail. Well, it turns out that actually people are not spending a lot of money in the long tail. And everybody's moving to the center. And then you can talk about the role of software and recommendation systems that actually move you back into the big product. And in fact, studios for the first time music publishing companies are actually sort of making money because the songs that people listen to are actually very much in the middle of the distribution, and that's where the money is being made. It's interesting sort of things that you can talk about. I talk about first mover advantage. This is, I have to say, my favorite story, because we all, the earlier you get in, the more you win, and this is Secretariat winning the Kentucky Derby in 1973 by 2.5 lengths, and then wins the Belmont by 31 lengths. So it sort of allows you to just tell the story in a funny way of how when you grab a lead. One of the things that I'm sure you know is in a digital goods world, it isn't always the case that the best product wins. An inferior product can win if it gets out there first and sort of captures, for example, data network effects. Okay, this has died on me. It's not good. Informational economies of scale, so size matters, bigger is better. So bigger companies actually have an advantage, which is what GE is trying to exploit. And then platform economics. One of the sort of the recommendations I have for you is you've got to be ready to adapt your slides based on what is happening that week. This happened to, I was teaching a different class, but I used this example, so I grabbed the slide. But here's Amazon, which has lost in the Fire phone business, where they lost a lot of money and nobody bought that phone of theirs. And they're back now because they use sort of voice, the interactive response, the sort of AI around voice to enter a crowded market. They've leveraged that into the show, which is this little display-based Alexa. And you can now do video conferencing. So we have 2 houses, so I can say, call my wife, and we can look at each other and talk if we want to. These are all the examples of the complementarities they're involving. But then I go into a question of, who's going to win the battle for home automation? And for years, we thought it was all these various companies, and then we thought it was Google, and now I think actually my bet is on Amazon, because if you look at sort of their ecosystem of things that you can manage your house with, these guys are doing well. So one of the points I try to emphasize here is, in this platform-based world that we live in, you have to make sure that you protect all flanks. And because the moment you leave some flank exposed, you can allow your competitors will come in through that weak link in your sort of defense, and you can grow out from there. One of the things we learned at the conference that I hold every March from the Target CIO, and this sort of surprised many of us. So nobody has really made a lot of money in online retail. And sort of the loss of profits in the physical world retail is massive, as obviously, let's look at the bankruptcies around us. So here you've got Amazon subsidizing its online retail business with profits in the cloud business, but they're destroying entire sectors of the economy. So it's a very bizarre phenomenon when you start. These are the things that I think that add color to what we're teaching that make it sort of really interesting, I think. Hey, Jinsei, can you just sort of fix this? Because for the, yes. Okay, I'll wrap. So I'm wrapping. So develop a compelling, so where I end with is develop a compelling vision. I got it. Just change the batteries. This focus on capabilities and talent. You got to focus on sort of the infrastructure. This is the part that gets left out. But as we go into move a tech-driven world, companies have a really hard time investing OpEx or CapEx into things. This is actually a story from the Delta CIO, which says they've been asking for money for infrastructure for years and not getting it. But this is what happens when this, of course, United. But so I think these are some of the parts that are unique to us that I think we need to talk about. There's a lot we can say about sort of the culture. I like to talk about the hacker ethos and the whole open source culture, because I think it's sort of the underpinnings of agile and things like that. And then digital trust is essential, because you can lose it all in a heartbeat. And I close with something like that, which is the digitization, or sometimes I open with it, is the most important thing we can work on, I think. But let me stop, because I've gone past my time. But I would love your feedback. So I've been saying and some of this is because I'm borrowing material. So we're taking some of the electives that we teach and putting the content from that into the core, because it's becoming more and more essential. So that's, to some degree, what I've been reflecting. But this is very much a work in progress, and we would love your feedback on sort of how you teach this and how we might improve, and how we actually make some of this tangible with the tools and techniques and cases that you actually use. With that, let me stop. Who's next?
Thank you very much.